I was inspired for today by the idea that here at the center there is the power of eight groups going on, the circles going on. And on the front cover of the book, it talks about ways to come together in healing circles for ourselves, each other, and for the world. I was thinking about that, the idea of coming together in a circle, coming together in a place of healing. And it inspired me further to think about something in my own life that I'd like to share with you today. It's always really amazing that when we get together with the people in our lives, that the gifts of those relationships are multi-layered. And when we take the time to spend with people that we love dearly and we have a relationship with them, we open ourselves up to those gifts. My beloved wife and I got together about 30 years ago, and she has been a gift to me that keeps on giving. But there was one gift in particular that I became aware of early on. She had a practice within her family, or she inherited a practice within her family, to go hang out with mom and sit at a kitchen table and to talk about things. Judy's mom was one of the most amazing people I've ever known. The most loving, the most inspirational people. She was very quiet in nature, but she was very open and very communicative, but she had a way of sharing her presence. And she would sit at her table, which was in conjunction to her kitchen, and usually in the kitchen there was a pot of soup going or maybe some cookies going or whatever. She was Italian, and so she always liked the kitchen to be in working order and smelling good. And so we would go visit her mom, and we would sit at her kitchen table, and sometimes her sisters would be there. And what was amazing to me was the level of communication that took place at that table. We would sit down and we'd have to have a cup of coffee. And I'm not much of a coffee drinker, but it didn't matter. I had to have a cup of coffee and I had to have a cookie. And we would sit and we would begin to talk about what was going on in the family and what was going on with us as individuals. And Judy's mom would sit there and she would ask questions and she would listen. And she would share her ideas, which were always, in my experience, they were always optimistic and encouraging and very loving. And there were times where the subject on the table, there would be aspects of disagreement among Judy and her sisters and her mom. And you knew that the disagreement was there, but it was amazing how they were all able to verbalize what they thought, and they were all always respectful of each other. And it didn't mean that they didn't hold their feelings and their ideas to be sacred and to be important, but they listened to each other, and especially Judy's mom. And she was always encouraging, and she was always optimistic. And having been the generation that she was, a teenager during World War II and all of that, and coming from a family that were farmers and with their struggles and stuff, she'd been through a lot. She'd seen a lot, and she knew that there was a better day coming. She knew that tomorrow could be better, and she knew that love was the most important thing. A deeply spiritual lady, in my opinion. She was Catholic, and she had a rosary in her purse, and she didn't make a lot of noise about her religious beliefs, but there was a spirituality to her, the essence of being in the presence of a quietly and compassionate wisdom, a quiet and compassionate wisdom. That's the way she was. And so I took to it. I mean, I loved it. I didn't come from a family where things were that open. Our communication, the family of my origin just wasn't that way. There tended to be agendas, and there could be silence, and there could be judgment, and all those kinds of things. And God bless my family. I love my family, but there was just kind of a different dynamic there. So when Judy turned me on to this, it was amazing to me. And I think I used to love going over to see her mom more than she did, just to hang out and go through that. And most of the time I was kind of a spectator, although Judy's mom always brought me into it, asked me what was going on with my job and how I was doing. And with my children, I was divorced, and I had, my kids were in that shuffle between people. we were making time for them, and everyone was rearranging their lives. And so she was talking to me about that. And she always wanted to know, and her interest was genuine. But at some point, I went from being a spectator to a participant. And what happened was I had 3 children, and we were starting to do the blending of the families that takes place when you have divorces and you have step parents, and then you have step uh, extended family. I guess it's called step extended family. I don't really know. But anyway, you get, cousins come together, new aunts and uncles, new people who are grandparents and things like that. And my children went through a lot, like a lot of kids do, in separations and divorces and things like that. And having their home break apart, and having to create these new homes, and spending weekends traveling between parents and things like that. So there was a lot going on. And one of my children, in one of the gatherings with Judy's family, said some things that were kind of hurtful and inappropriate, just because they were coming from a space where they were a little bit uneasy, or felt hurt at some level, or left out, or I don't know, who knows, but they acted out like we as human beings do. And it was very unfortunate, and it was difficult for Judy and I to go through. And the last people in the world I wanted to hurt were Judy's parents, because they were such wonderful people, and what I've already talked about with Judy's mom. And so I told Judy I was going to go over one day and visit her mom alone. I didn't want Judy to go with me, and I wanted to sit down and talk to her. And Judy's dad was there also. And so I did, and I called, and I asked if I could come over on a particular day and see them. And of course she said, yeah, sure, come over. So I sat down, and I began to, first of all, apologize for what my child had done. But then secondly, I was trying to explain why I think, what was going on and what happened, and not going into the details of what my child did, but I kind of understood where they were coming from, and it was connected with the ways that they had lived the last several years and what was going on. And I began to share that. And Judy's mom, who had never been through a divorce herself, and whose family, there were some divorces in the larger family, but not a lot of them. And so I was trying to come to it from the standpoint of where I was. And Judy's mom listened to me, and she was very connected and present, like she always was. She always let you know she was present for whatever you were saying. And she asked a couple of questions, which I really appreciated, for some clarity. And then when it was winding down, and I said, I want to apologize. I'm sorry. I just want to make sure that you guys are okay. And she said, well, Andy, of course I'm okay, because we just love her, and we feel for what she's been through, and we love you, and we feel for what you've been through. And that was amazing to me, to have someone show up, not in terms of the particulars of my life, but in terms of the idea of, first of all, honoring it, learning about it, and then coming to it from that place of love, that place of acceptance. That was very profound to me. I've carried that for a long time, and I think that it has made me better professionally when I can remember that. And the thing is that as I sit here today, I'm keenly aware of the fact that sometimes I don't remember that. And one of those times was just recently. There's a store that I go into every morning on my way to work to get, I'm an iced tea person, and so I buy a bottled iced tea that I take with me for the day. And there's a person that is always there early in the morning, who generally checks me out. And so for the last couple of years, we've gotten to know each other, since I've been living in Chico. And we've gotten to know each other just on a very casual basis. And, I know that she's a horse person. I know that, and I know her position in the store, and she knows where I work, and I know I've heard about her significant other, and she's heard about my significant other. And so we talk, and we do that casual kind of conversation and that you have. And it's a conversation where that you kind of care for each other. There's this real casual relationship, but that's kind of where it goes. And recently, I went in the morning and I was starting to, go through the thing of paying for what I got. And I don't know if she was tired or if she was, a little bit run down or whatever, or, maybe just not having a good day. But she ended up making some comments about some things sort of political in nature. And I discovered that her politics were very different than mine. And she expressed her ideas, and I just kind of stood there quietly, and I really, I didn't want to offend her or anything, but I'm not a kind of person, for people who know me, if you ever ask about me, they'll say that I don't have a poker face. And so I'm sure my face took on that look on me, what, oh my God, what are you saying? And so so our conversation ended kind of in a cold way, kind of, politely abrupt. And I walked out of there and I found myself just going into such judgment about it. And I even told Judy about it and stuff. And I was just amazed. And so I realized that I hadn't shown up in a way that was open and loving. And there's a word that I want to bring forward now, and it's the word intimate, a level of intimacy. And see, that's the thing that I learned at the kitchen table, was the idea of intimacy. And I think that prior to meeting, Judy's family and stuff, I struggled with that. Of course, you have the intimacy of people who get together romantically or long term or supposedly family and stuff. But the intimacy of because I was new to the family and I watched her mom build that intimacy, and it was amazing to me. And that intimacy is our human connection. It's our caring. It's our, knowing just enough about people and to care about people and to recognize that at some level we're sharing this journey with them, even if it's briefly. And my education and my opening up to what intimacy really is has just flowered over the years because of the influence of her. And I walked out and I thought, wow, why? I became keenly aware of the fact that I'm so spellbound by this idea of the kitchen table, of Judy's mom's kitchen table, and what that represented, the archetype. It's an archetype for me. And I realized that I don't really carry it with me sometimes, that I don't go into that place of intimacy. Because it's that place of intimacy where I think the healing takes place, where a sense that we're going to be okay takes place, a sense that we're all in this together takes place. I want to share with you something from an organization named Hazelton. And Hazelton is an information and educational services. It's a company or an organization for human transformation. And doing the work I've done for the last 30 years, working with people in different organizations, I've dealt with a lot of Hazelton material. As a media organization, they have great material around change and recovery and those kinds of things. And I found something recently in one of their books, and I wanted to share it with you today. And it says, in seeking community, we have often made the mistake of looking only for similarities. Although common ground helps us understand, we must learn how to get close to others by borrowing their eyes and ears. We expand our understanding of others by accepting that what we see, hear, think, and feel will not be exactly what anyone else does. We can deepen our relationships by exchanging our experiences with others. We don't have to agree on everything. Simply learning about each other's differences and letting each other know that we hear and understand will create a feeling of intimacy. Wow, that to me was the kitchen table. That we could sit down with this woman and she would, for a moment, borrow our eyes and our ears to whoever was talking. She would ask questions about our experience, not just our views, our religious views, our political views, our cultural views, whatever, but what has been our experience. To be open to what the experience is. And I think about this idea of the power of 8, the groups that are getting together, the circles that are getting together, and this idea that we're here to heal ourselves, we're here to heal each other, we're here to heal the world. And right now, I think a lot of us would say, wow, there's some stuff in our country and the world. It's overwhelming. What in the world do we do? And then we put on top of that the pandemic issue, which has kind of isolated us physically and maybe emotionally. I hope not, but maybe. Taking us out of our connections. The woman in the store and I have a level of intimacy. We've had it for a long time in this type of relationship we have. The morning touchstone. Hey, how you doing? You know, how was your weekend? How are your horses? And because I wasn't willing to open up to her experience in that moment, how I learned how fragile that was. I learned that it was something that could drift away. And I think that within our society and our culture and our nation, and certainly in our world, so those intimate relationships are kind of fragile right now. I'm an optimistic person. I'm not going to say they're broken, even though, you know, we hear words like polarization and all of that. But I do think they're fragile. I do think that they're calling upon us to think about intimacy and think about intimacy as a spiritual practice. That's really interesting. Intimacy as a spiritual practice. Is that what's going on in the circle of 8s? I hope so. Is that what goes on between us? I hope so. I know that for me, I left that store that morning feeling a sense of loss. Amongst, you know, a little bit of my anger and disappointment or whatever, there was also a sense of loss. And what's interesting was a couple of days later, I was in the store and she came up to me and she said, how are you doing? I said, I'm doing pretty good. She goes, well, I wondered because you haven't seemed like yourself. And so I, excuse me, I told her, I said, well, you know, I mean, we live in interesting times and sometimes I kind of let it get to me. And she said, yeah, me too, and stuff like that, you know, because these are interesting times. I think they almost need us to reach out to each other's experience more than ever. I think I've said this in a talk that I've done here in Chico before, but when I worked in juvenile corrections for a long time, and I learned a lot about crisis intervention. And you would have groups and institutions, sometimes correctional institutions, that kind of lined up against each other, and there was always kind of a threat that the peace was going to be lost if they decided to act out their aggression. And one of the first things I learned in crisis intervention, and Judy's mom reminded me of this, is find out where people are coming from. Find out people's experience. Where are they from? What are they doing? What's going on in their life? You see, Psychology 101 kind of tells us that if there is some sort of a national or large issue that really makes me angry, that doesn't appear to affect me directly, that means I have an emotional connection to that issue. And that emotional connection somehow comes from my experience. You say, oh, how in the world can someone think the way they think? And what psychology tells us, what crisis intervention techniques tell us, what Hazelden is trying to tell us, is we have to get to know their experience. There is a reason. There is a reason. When my child acted out with Judy's family, her mom always knew there was a reason. How is she? How's she doing? Tell me about her. How did the divorce affect her? What has she been going through? Wow. Isn't that, when we look at the great masters that have come down through the ages, Jesus, Buddha, Lao Tzu, whoever, isn't it true that a big part of them was they would listen. They would spend time in someone else's life. You know, Jesus going out on the boat with the apostles, isn't that a metaphor? Isn't it an archetype for let me come into your experience? When he would encounter the lepers, let me come into their experience. Those who were looking for healing, let me come into their experience. Isn't that what that was all about? We know that Buddha had his disciples around him and he went from community to community to community. And in some of the books I've read recently, he would sit and he would talk to political leaders. He would talk to shop owners. He would talk to the local people. What's your life like? What's going on with you? Martin Luther King, with other leaders of the civil rights movement, spent a night or two in jail with them. He marched with them. Isn't that the archetype of the march? We are here together, all of us, shopkeepers, janitors, ministers, police officers, whatever. We're coming together. And we've seen recently in what's gone on in our country around some of the racial issues, that now we see these demonstrations with people from all kinds of age groups, backgrounds across society. Isn't that beautiful? Because they're there together. And I read somewhere where there was a police officer who got himself, things kind of got chaotic. He got himself cut off from his other police officers, and several African-American people came and got him back to his group safely, because they could look past the uniform and the badge and the anger they have and say, well, this is a human being. And what is he afraid of? And what does he need? And what is his experience? Isn't that what we're all really learning right now about these experiences through what's happening? And so I like to, in my mind, think about these power of 8 groups out there being around a kitchen table, even if it's virtual, and coming together for that open and mutual healing that can take place. To borrow the eyes of another, the ears of another, to find out how they are feeling, how they're expressing, and to share the same with ourselves. I really want to thank you for being here today. And so we're going to go on with ending the service, and I just want to say namaste. Thank you very much.